We talked about during that last segment the fourth line and the limited minutes, all the different combinations that the Kraken have had on it have been, and in part of that is because of Shane Wright not being in the lineup consistently. Right, played in, I believe it's 5 games. He's got that 1 point, that one almost goal in those 5 games, averaging 6 minutes and 50 seconds in those games played. And it's been 3 games in a row now. He's been out of the lineup. The last couple days, we've seen some more noise or talk about that. Get an article for the Kraken's website from Allison Lucan, where she talks with Shane's family and she talks with Ron Francis. So we get some kind of insights there. And then also last night, you have Jeff Merrick talking to a fairly large audience that might not be totally paying close attention to the Kraken about it, and saying that all sides are frustrated by the situation with Shane Wright. And so I guess RJ, do you want to kind of touch on that first, and then we can kind of dig into the many layers that this situation has?
Sure. So this has been, kind of an ongoing story with the Kraken over the past week. They had a 3-game homestand, and Shane Wright was a healthy scratch for all 3 games. And one thing that was also pointed out, and this doesn't really matter on the hockey side of it, but his grandparents came up to visit, and they were here for the 3-game homestand. I got to meet them. They're very, very nice people, adorable couple, and they didn't really get to see him play. So that was another issue there. And, with the Jeff Merrick report, yeah, that reporting that basically everybody involved seems to be frustrated. I kind of wanted you to make this point because you made it so well kind of before we were talking. But I mean, what's your take on that Merrick report?
Well, that of course there's frustration, right? Like, how could there not be? You've got on the team side of things, you have this player you've drafted that is going to be a big part of your future plans, and he's not seeing the ice right now. He's not getting games in. Kind of the worst thing we know for any player developing is to just kind of sit in the press box, and Ron Francis talks about that in the Allison Lucan article. So of course the team is frustrated because they're not getting what they want out of the player that there's expectation around. And then on the player side also, you're not playing. Show me a player who isn't frustrated when they're not playing, right? Show me the player who's happy to be a healthy scratch. So I felt like the whole thing was kind of just built out of some obvious stuff. The thing I kept coming around to was you don't need to be in the building, and you don't need to have an inside source to come to the conclusion that both sides would be frustrated when it comes to this situation. So I feel like it was more so Jeff Merrick kind of needing to have a talking point as they were talking about all the rookies, and the as many of them have kind of hit the 8 game mark, and the decisions whether or not to send them all down. And then you have to touch on the Shane Wright situation. I feel like it's just kind of like an easy out from a media standpoint, as a group that doesn't have somebody here covering the Shane Wright situation full time, right? They don't know all of the ins and outs, and we'll talk about how much of the ins and outs we actually know covering them all the time. But
Mhm.
it was just one of those things where it was like, yeah, of course there's frustration. Why wouldn't there be? Show me this situation anywhere, and tell me that there isn't frustration from either party.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me.
So, all right. So we in the as we get into the more of the Allison Lucan article, you get Ron Francis at one point talking about how you want to see him playing more like 10 to 12 minutes rather than the kind of 6 minutes. Like I said, he's averaging 650 of ice time. Obviously, I talked about this way back when he was drafted. I said, kind of, if you're going to keep him up and most of the season he's going to be your fourth line center, it's probably not best for his development just because of the limited situational use, the limited minutes he's going to get. You're probably better off having him go back to major junior just to get more minutes in, just because at that young age, and especially considering he missed that full year in the OHL due to COVID, just getting game reps is what's going to be best for this kid. And I've come off of that a little bit just because I feel like, is him beating up on lesser skilled players in the CHL necessarily the best thing for his overall development? Will that actually help him make a adjustment to the NHL game next season easier? Will it make it easier? I don't know. You get Ron Francis kind of musing and asking the question of, and if Shane Wright's in a Memorial Cup kind of run situation in the CHL, is that maybe a better situation going on? And that's again something I talked about the first night he was scratched. The idea popped into my mind of, well, maybe they just don't want him going to Kingston. Like maybe they just want him in a different situation. Maybe send him over to Hamilton, play with Ryan Winterton, your other prospect, right? They had a Memorial Cup run last year with Winterton and Mason McTavish. Maybe you have Shane Wright go and kind of do that, fill the Mason McTavish void in a Hamilton kind of. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that kind of situation, RJ, and that kind of Ron Francis quote from the article?
Yeah, I mean, it made me kind of reconsider what he had said earlier about the plan is for Shane Wright to stay the whole year. I think they might be second guessing that a little bit. The fact that he kind of pointed to that type of scenario, one that we've already been thinking about a little bit, I think it makes a lot of sense. And the reason it makes a lot of sense is because I think all parties involved, Merrick mentioned the obvious frustration. I think they've found themselves in kind of an impossible situation, and one where each person's interests don't necessarily align with each other's. And that's what's creating this difficult situation. You have the different stakeholders in this. You've got Ron Francis, who kind of the long-term view of the organization is his priority and has to be. You've got Shane Wright, who, his development and obviously just wanting to get into games is a priority. And then you've got Dave Haxtell, who at the end of the day is just trying to put together the best lineup that he believes gives the team the best chance to win. And that's what Haxtell is doing. He's kind of has the final say as far as who plays in any given night. And that's his job, is to put the lineup together that he feels gives the team a best chance to win. And I think that you and I might even agree that the lineups he's putting on the ice are the lineups that are giving the Kraken the best chance to win night in, night out, right?
Yeah, it's hard to deny like how well Morgan Geeky's playing, right? As he's gotten two big time goals over the course of this past week. We've spent most of this podcast prior to now talking about how good the depth of the Kraken has been playing, how they're outclassing their opponents in the bottom six. So I totally understand from a coaching standpoint, as somebody who, coming off the season you had last year, you want to be able to be in that playoff hunt. Even if you don't quite get there, you at least want to be in that conversation for as long as possible. It makes all the sense in the world then to maybe not, try to force a bunch of minutes to your 18-year-old rookie when you know that these other players are working and it's all gelling and you're winning hockey games, you're beating teams like the Pittsburgh Penguins. You know what I mean? It's really hard.
Right. But when you look at the bigger picture, you have to balance that against
Yes.
Shane Wright's long-term development. And you could make a good argument that Shane Wright's long-term development actually means more to this organization than wins right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough because Dave Haxtell can't really take that into consideration given what his job is. The GM can take that into consideration. And I suppose you could have the GM come in and step in and be like, okay, yeah, I know this might lead to less wins now, but the long-term view is more important. You kind of have to play this player. But I think that's a really bad situation. I don't think you ever want that in an organization, really, where you have the GM stepping in and telling the coach who he can and can't play. So it just kind of creates this impossible situation for everyone involved. And then on top of it, you've got the junior team not being the ideal destination for him. And it feels like everyone's kind of stuck.
Yeah, and that's the perfect word, is stuck. As far as the other, you say impossible situation, I say no win situation. Because like if you're Dave Haxtell in this situation and the GM is saying, "Hey, play this guy, play this guy, play this guy," but at the same time you're looking around and you and I know, right? We're doing these post-game lives after every single Kraken game. All through last season we were hearing it. Through any time the Kraken struggle through this season, the first thing everyone is saying is, they're, at the very least, they're questioning Dave Haxtell, if not outright saying he needs to be fired, right? And so if you're Dave Haxtell and you're saying, came in with a certain level of expectation last year, didn't really meet those expectations through that full season, this year still remains to be seen. I understand the idea of, in a way, he is coaching for his job. His job is performance results driven, as everybody's in sports is. And so he's in this no-win situation unless you have just absolute assurances from ownership, from management, from everybody that, hey, no matter what happens this year, as long as we're playing right and we develop him, your job is safe, which I don't know that they would give him, because it seems kind of nuts to give that to any coach if you're in that situation. Then you can't take that as a guarantee. You have to do what is best for the club day to day, which has been what he's doing. And if you're Ron Francis, it's a no-win situation, because if you truly feel that sending him back to the OHL is not what's best for him, you're worried about him forming bad habits or not being able to get, play against tough enough competition to really kind of take that next step, whatever it is that you're worried about. But at the same time, you're understanding of the fact that, hey, I can't force him into the lineup here, right? Like, I can't just take control of this team, become, you know what I mean? And so it's a no-win situation for him. And then yes, poor Shane Wright really is the one guy, he has no say in anything. Like, he's the most powerless in this, because he has no ability to just put himself in the lineup. Obviously he can work, and we're seeing that he's working extremely hard. After every single practice, you're putting out video of him working one-on-one with the Kraken coaching staff, skating until he basically just falls down, because he's
Yes.
just wearing himself out so much. He is putting in the work. He's doing absolutely everything he can possibly can to prove to this coaching staff that he deserves ice time. But at the end of the day, I understand. I see the situation from all sides, and it's a no-win situation.
Yeah, and I mean, he is putting in the work. I think that is really worth mentioning as someone
Yes.
who kind of sees him out there. He's out there with the scratches after practice, but he's the last one off the ice too. It's not, like he's just getting that extra work in with everybody. He is putting in that individual work with the coaches later, basically until he drops. I have seen that a couple times, until he literally just falls down and cannot skate anymore. He's putting in that work, but due to factors outside his control, he hasn't been given a chance to prove himself. And I think that's something that's also worth mentioning too, that when you get into 5 games out of 10 and you're averaging less than 7 minutes of ice time, that's not a fair opportunity to prove himself. And I know
Mm-hmm.
we haven't seen enough from him to say, look, he's a difference maker. He's somebody who kind of deserves to be in the lineup if you're just trying to win games. But I think for a player like that, you need at least 10 to 12 minutes, like Ron Francis said, just to be able to know, not just, to prove to the coach and the GM, but for yourself to
Mm-hmm.
know if you can hang at this level. And that's, I think, another difficult part of this situation. Even if you were to just find a good junior team for him and send him down, I think that's something that could be difficult for his confidence, because he hasn't really had that fair opportunity to kind of fail at the NHL level and show that, maybe you should be sent down. If he gets, 12 to 15 minutes or so for a few games, and look, he's just maybe not the most effective player, then you can send him back, and without any kind of hard feelings, and he
Mm-hmm.
realizes where he needs to improve, and he can kind of rationalize that too, as far as why he's being sent down, and why he can't stick at the NHL level. But right now, again, I don't know what's going through his mind, but I think it would be easy to think, look, I just haven't been given a fair shake yet. I do belong here, but I haven't had the chance to prove myself.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree. And it's so stark when you look at, yeah, 5 games out of 10, 650 of ice time. I mean, that's like the dying days of the enforcer, what they were getting, right, RJ?
Yeah,
like that's
it's a
the
step below fourth line ice time.
right, because what we're seeing is game by game. This is what I want to see. I forget the actual number of time on ice. I want to see him actually take every shift that the fourth line takes, because what we've seen through those 5 games is that he takes every other shift, or sometimes every third shift. The fourth line goes out there. They're rotating a different center in, playing with them. And that's just something that you can't do. Like, he needs to be
No.
out there with his guys, building confidence, building chemistry with his line mates. Like, that is the only way you're going to be able to get an accurate read on him. And so I don't know, at this point we can kind of transition into what we think it would take to get him in the lineup. I mean, for me, I kind of just got the feeling, just because there's so much noise around it, and I mentioned this briefly on Post Game Live last night, maybe we see him in the next game just because of that. But I don't know. Like, is it going to take a losing streak to get him in there?
It might. I think it might take a losing streak. I thought the loss against the Canucks would be enough to
Yeah.
get him into the lineup. I know it's not a losing streak, but maybe that is what it'll take, is multiple losses where you feel you have to shake something up. Honestly, at this point, I feel like it's just injuries. It
Yeah.
might just take injuries, and obviously you never want that to happen. So I don't know what it's going to take at this point if he didn't get in for this Penguins game, and it's tough because Hackstall, he's making this. I guess you could call it a bold decision not to put Wright in the lineup, given all the noise around everything. And I almost want to, kind of give him some credit there for sticking to his guns because it's paying off. Like you look at the Penguins game, it was the most complete effort the team has had all season. And it was a game where, I think he was very roundly criticized that
Mhm.
morning for not putting Shane Wright in the lineup. And when you're getting those positive results, in terms of a win in a convincing game, I think as a coach, just to get to that position as a coach, you have to kind of be able to insulate yourself from that outside noise. And so I don't know what it's going to take.
Yeah, and then I guess the last thing to talk about, just because we've seen this pop up, and I'm sure people are talking about it everywhere when they consider the situation, is the idea of, you know, are you completely married to the idea of him having to play center? Do you move him to the wing because that gets it a little easier to get him in the lineup? We've seen, Hackstall. I mean, we just talked about it earlier. Carson Kuhlman coming out for this Penguins game. Donato kind of subbing in there. Do we think that the ice time would be easier to come by if he's playing on the wing, kind of less responsibilities? You don't have kind of that two-way responsibility in the same way that if he's playing center. I mean, kind of your thoughts on that.
I think the ice time would be a little bit easier to come by if no injuries happen. I still
I
don't know
know.
how you're looking at like a Koolman. Maybe he gets in over a Ryan Donato on the fourth line, and even then maybe he doesn't get a ton of ice time. So I don't know that makes things a whole lot better, really. But it would be a little easier to come by, and I think maybe that's a solution here when you're talking about the alternatives of sending him back to junior, or gosh, even it's like sending him to Europe, whatever. When you're
Right.
talking about those alternatives, maybe moving him to wing seems like a less extreme option, but I still think it's something the team would prefer not to do.
Right, and Europe is the only other option, and I could see an argument to be made for it because he'd be playing against men, he'd be playing against better competition night in night out than he would probably in the OHL. So it would be a good development thing. But I think the Kraken want him in house. They want him around their NHL team. They want to get him used to the NHL lifestyle. That's the other big part of that Allison Lucan article is just the fact that this is a kid who's never lived on his own, had to live on his own before. He's 18, right? And he's never had to have be not in school, right? Like you've always had all these things. Think of where you're at 18 years old, and now imagine being put in the situation that Shane Wright's in. There's a lot going on there, and then to just be like, hey, would you consider moving to a different continent? Time zones completely different, all that stuff, and you're just gonna have to kind of figure it out in a country that doesn't speak the same language as you. You know what I mean? Like you don't speak their language.
Yeah.
It'd be
All in the
insane.
middle of a hockey season too.
Right.
Transferring from one team
It,
to another at any point in the middle of the season, it's
yeah.
just so much. I don't think that's a good idea.
No, I don't think it can happen. As far as him playing on the wing, the one thing I would be concerned about is if the whole idea is that he is you're doing the long term plan, and the long term plan says, hey, at some point this guy's going to be our number two center behind Matty Beniers, and that's going to be our pillars that we build around for the next decade plus. I, do you really want to move him to wing if part of the reason you're not sending him back down to major junior is that you don't want him building bad habits or not being able to work on exactly what you want him working on, then I don't see moving him to wing as being a solution just because it's a completely different game, right? It's going to have completely different responsibilities. Where he's supposed to be on the ice is going to be completely different. I don't think, just because he's only 18 and no 18-year-old is nearly physically developed, I don't think that you can have him be like a winger who's going to be going and driving the net a bunch and all that kind of stuff, or being super effective below the goal line on the forecheck just because, like I said, no 18-year-old is as fully developed as a 25-year-old. It's just not how bodies work. And so it's a tough situation. I don't think wing's an option. Europe's obviously not an option. It sounds like for the Kraken, the OHL isn't an option unless maybe something changes. And so we're just kind of left in this waiting game, and it's just an unfortunate situation all the way around.
It is, and I think something we should also explain too while we're talking about this, because I've seen questions about this on social media and online. No, AHL Coachella Valley
Yeah.
is not an option for Shane Wright. There's an agreement between the NHL and the CHL as far as junior teams. So if you're under 20, you can't play in the AHL. It's NHL, OHL, or Europe basically are the different options. But I just wanted to clarify that because I know there were a lot of people asking, well, why don't they just send him to Coachella Valley? Which I do think would be the perfect development
Yes.
situation for him.
1000%. Which, we could have a whole other like hour-long discussion about that idea. You know what I mean? A whole separate podcast about the idea of should first round picks, or should there be like almost an exceptional player status situation, something Shane Wright's very familiar with, where you can apply to kind of get waived into the AHL. Now, I can't imagine the Canadian Hockey League being okay with this in any shape or form, because those are the kinds of guys that they want around, right? They're best players essentially, right? If you're talking about somebody that you want to be playing in the AHL. So I don't think that would happen soon, but yes, ideally that's what you would be doing, especially with the fact that Coachella Valley is in Seattle right now. They're
Yes.
using the same facilities. You're playing in the same arena. You're getting that NHL lifestyle experience. He could be living in the same, apartment or wherever he's at. He could still be having all of that until the team, kind of gets set up down in Coachella Valley in December. So oh my gosh, it would just be so perfect. But of course, that's the perfect solution is the one solution the Kraken don't have available to them. It's just going to be
life.
Yep, it's just a tough situation. It's just going to be interesting to see when he next gets in the lineup, and unfortunately we're all just going to have to wait and see when that is.
Yep, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep watching, and hopefully we see him at some point.